Yeah, so we're good to go, Lydia.
All right, good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to the May 19th, 2020 Virtual Curriculum Committee meeting for the Radner Township School District. First item on the agenda is introductions and administrative remarks. Mr. Bechtel?
No administrative remarks this evening.
All right, that brings us to public comment. Is there any public comment at this time?
And I think Patty was checking it, monitoring it for us, and or Michael, and I think is there any, I don't think there's any public comment. They would chime in or shoot me a text, so I don't think there is any at this point.
Should we just quickly say how they could make comments? Ken, can you just...
Yep, it's the normal process. So it is just, what is it, board questions I don't have in front of me. It's our normal board comments.
Yes.
It's our normal email that we always use. So it's kind of nice that our system we had before we went virtual is still the same system for people who aren't attending the meeting. They can email those comments. They can email them now. They can email them right before the meeting or, a couple hours, and then we'll read them at the meeting.
So it's board comments at rtsd.com. Is that
.org.
.org.
.org. Yes, thank you. All right. Speeding right along. Should we go right into, oh no, we've got to approve our minutes. The next item is the approval of the April 21st, 2020 Virtual Curriculum Committee meeting minutes. Committee members, any comments on that? Any corrections? I see no. Everybody's good, Sarah? Andrew? Okay. So the meeting minutes stand as written. And then we'll move right into, we've got a packed agenda. So we have several items. First one on up is the action items for the business meeting next Tuesday. Mr. Bechtel?
All right, thank you. So we do have a number of action items to move forward to the full board meeting. We have approval of an agreement revision with Drexel University. We have Schoology Learning Management System contract for the next school year, 2020-2021 school year. We have the awards for the approval of the scholarships for both the Crescent and Dreer scholarships. These approvals do not have student names with them, so the board is approving that will be awarded, and then we will come back in June and then have the actual names, so the students do not know that they've been selected yet, but we would ask the board to provisionally approve the awarding of these scholarships. And then we've got a grant from the Radner Educational Foundation for the summer internship program. So we had planning that began for the internship program, and REF awarded this grant for that to take place, and they're asking that the board approve this. There were some pre-planning costs that were incurred, and they would like to donate to cover those costs. And then the last thing that we have is a request for a student survey, which I will bring up. This student survey, here we go. The student survey is a follow-up, a fourth edition to what every middle school teacher should know. And so back in 2014, the third edition of what every middle school teacher should know was published, and Dr. Trudy Knowles and Dr. Brown surveyed students in the Soundings program at Radner Middle School and included information that based off of the student survey in the book, and credited and thanked Radner Middle School, Radner Township School District, and the Soundings program. They're looking to release their fourth edition, and per our policy on student rights and surveys, we require board approval for third-party surveys. Included in this is a permission slip for parents to allow their child to participate if they're so inclined, and it also includes all the survey questions. The district will receive a copy of the survey, and all student responses will be anonymous, so in the book. So we would ask that that also would be moved forward for board approval.
So I just have two quick questions. So the survey will only go, I think you said, to 40 students?
It will be the students in the Soundings program, just as it was in 2014.
Okay, and for the Schoology, are we updating our entire license, or is this stuff that we're adding to what we currently get from Schoology?
This is a 1-year license for everything that we currently have with Schoology.
Okay, thank you.
Lydia, a brief comment. I just want to say thank you, Dan, for providing me some information about the survey. I think it's worth noting here, just for the meeting, that there was a previous edition of the book that is in the works, whereby any kind of institutional review process was gone through, and the ethics have all gone through. So it's basically just kind of a repeat performance of before. So, and also it's also nice to know that this is a research team that the district is familiar with, that we've worked with before, and that we're fully consenting to this research.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out, Andrew, because I'm always weary of taking our students' time for things. So I'm glad that you checked into that it's all valid. And
Can I ask a quick question about the Drexel relationship?
quick.
Very quick. So Dan, I guess I was looking at the memorandum of understanding, and it talks about in classroom work. And I guess my question is whether these students will have any role in student teaching if we aren't in classes. I mean, I know we aren't this spring at this point. I just didn't know whether, and maybe it relates to what they actually get credit for, but is there any way to help them learn about online teaching from this as well, and have them integrated in helping our teachers in the situation? You know, there's still a potential for mentoring. I just don't know if it would be involved at all in a virtual learning.
So we had student teachers that were queued up for the spring and that started with us, and they continued with us. So the goal was to continue to allow them to fulfill their hours and work alongside their mentor teacher to the greatest extent possible. So we would look to continue that into the next school year as well. And so to the extent possible, have them go and teach virtual classes under the supervision of a teacher and the guidance of a teacher.
Great, thanks.
Okay, thanks everyone. Let's move on then to 4.
Yeah, Lydia, can we all ask a question if we have one? How do you want us to do that?
Oh, sure. Jump in, Amy. That's fine. I'm sorry. Didn't know you had anything.
Okay. Could just in the interest of clarifying that the survey is just for the sounding students, when it moves to the full board next week, would it be possible to revise the items so that people know it's not the whole middle school being surveyed, it's just soundings? Because it wasn't listed like that in the agenda. Would that be okay to just mention that it's a sounding survey?
We can certainly include that in the agenda for the meeting, that it's for the sounding students.
Okay. And my other quick question was about Schoology. Just curious, how many years have we been at that? And do you feel like is there a very brief way you can give us some feedback on how you feel that platform's been working for us? And are there any other features that you've thought about maybe that they are offering now that we might be able to use, especially in the situation we're in right now with distance learning?
That's a great question. So Schoology, our license is expiring at the end of June, and we elected to request a 1-year contract. We've got Dr. Scott Hand, who's coming in as our new Director of Technology, and we want to make sure that we thoroughly investigate our learning management system. So rather than going with a 3, 4, 5-year contract, we opted for a 1-year contract, and then that's going to give Mr. Dukevich and myself and Dr. Hand an opportunity to really look into is Schoology meeting our needs. They have been very responsive with us, but there's a lot of different platforms out there. I was on a conference call this week with a number of curriculum directors and superintendents, and we were comparing notes on different platforms and what was working. And some districts really like Schoology, some like Canvas. And so I think that it makes sense for the district in the short term to go and lock up Schoology for an additional year, and then really dig in and make sure that our LMS is meeting our needs. But you know, as far as additions and things to help enhance instruction, one of the things that we used this year that we had not previously was a Big Blue Button. And that came about as an app, an add-on to Schoology, based off of the need for us to go and live stream. And so we have been evaluating and looking at different apps on the Schoology platform that meet our needs, and we will continue to do that moving forward.
Great, thanks, Dan. I mean, the learning management system is where it's at. You need that more than anything these days. So thanks for laying out that plan like that for us. Just remind me, how long have we had Schoology?
Oh,
I'm not sure off the top of my head. I believe that came in when we did our one-to-one initiative with the iPad. So I believe that would probably be at least 7, if not 8 years ago.
Okay, thanks.
yeah, and just I've heard a lot of things about Canvas as well, but I would just caution us to not, well, this is a conversation for another day, but not to change things midstream if we've got everybody up and running on something that they know how to use. Like, whoa, there may be something better, but boy, there's a huge cost to moving everybody to something else. So just we'll talk about that another day.
Lydia, I think Jesse was going to weigh in on that too.
Yeah, go ahead, Jess.
I agree 100%. As the student, I've only heard positive reviews from Schoology, and I think that even some teachers still are finding trouble, like not trouble using it, but are still working out the kinks and being able to use it. And so I think switching to a new system would just kind of reset the whole process. So if I have any input, I think Schoology is great. And it's, aside from some internet traffic issues where like a lot of people going on and it crashes at the beginning of quarantine, it's been fantastic.
All right.
And the only thing I was just going to add to that is one of the feedbacks I'm hearing from parents and kids is that, you know, it's all different how we use Schoology and how we organize Schoology. And it can be different between elementary, middle school, and high school. And sometimes it can even be different within a building, how a teacher organizes their folders on Schoology. So one of the things each principal and teachers have been talking about moving forward is how do we get some consistency maybe to how we use it. So I think the discussions have really been more about, you know, how do we fully utilize it? How do we get more, I think Jesse, you know, summed it up, how do we get more professional development and support? Because our teachers were all kind of across the board, with some really dove into using Schoology a lot before this. Others were at different points how they use Schoology before we went out, and it has become the anchor that has really pulled together, and we're seeing a lot of positives with how we can use it. But we want to start talking about some of that consistency and what is the best way? You know, let's look at how teachers have set up folders that have worked, you know, really well, and how can we replicate that, and how can others learn from that?
All right. Are we ready to move on to 4.2? This is the new updated 2019-2020 instructional calendar. Mr. Bechtel?
Certainly, and I will pull it up. So we have the revised calendar here. We revised the end of the school year. One of the things that we looked at was making sure that we are properly planned for the fall. And so to ensure that we have time for teachers to go and look at the material that they covered and what is in their curriculum documents that they did not get a chance to cover, and to really look at planning formative assessments to help gauge where students at when they would come back in September, and also to provide time over the summer for them to work on their classes and receive flexible professional development. We recommending that the board end the school year for students on Friday, June 5th. The teachers would have a professional development day on the 8th, where they would have vertical and horizontal team meetings to discuss curriculum. And then the remainder of the days would be banked to be used over the summer for them to receive professional development and also work on their courses on Schoology.
Okay, so I specifically want to punt this over to our teacher representative, Ms. McMiniman. Just if you have any comments, you can say no comment. What are your thoughts about the new revised calendar?
I'm actually in favor of the new revised calendar, and several of my colleagues that I talked to are also. I think the fact that we're going to have some time for professional development later in the summer is helpful because we don't know what direction we're going to go yet come the fall. And to do 6 days now really would seem a little bit more pointless, leaving all that gap as we're trying to plan for whatever scenarios we're planning for. So I think most people are on board with the decision moving forward, and it will help us as we plan for the fall.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate hearing that. Anybody else, or can we move on to other things? I think we've looked at the calendar so many times this year, we probably have it memorized. All right, let's move on to 4.3. And this is paraeducator support. And this is a concept that I wasn't familiar with all that had been done. So I want to hand this over to Ryan, right? This is going to be.
Yeah, so Mr. Budabal will be speaking tonight about the paraeducator support. I'd like to give a lot of credit to Mr. Budabal. He's worked really closely with Jenny Lesage, Director of Special Education, and George Regal, our Assistant Director, and Ryan's really led a team to help get our paraeducators online. So Ryan, can you please go through and highlight for us some of the things that we've done?
Yes, good evening, everyone. Thank you for those nice words, Dan. Believe it or not, the last time I presented at the board meeting, the calendar was on the agenda. However, at the time it was about before or after Labor Day. So, things have changed, right? So, just as a quick preview and overview of the para plan is that whenever we realized we were going to be staying closed for an extended period of time, the directors and principals and others put together the 4-phase plan. And so the paraeducator support really falls in with phase 3. So, if you turn to page 3 of the document, you don't have to turn there and just kind of run through it with you. As Mr. Bechtold said, it really took a team to put this together. We now have 74 paraprofessionals in the 5 buildings, K to 12, supporting teachers and supporting students. And it really just evolved very quickly, like everything else. And it took a team to make it happen. So working with Mr. Bechtold, Mr. Minkevich, George Regal, and of course the admins in the building. So I'd have to give a lot of thanks to Mr. Brett Thomas at the high school, Doug Kent in the middle school, and Heather Gillen Esposito at the elementary school. Again, they're the ones on the ground really working. And RESPA, they've been great through the whole process. So when this first started, we hear a lot about Schoology, topic tonight. Our paraeducators did not have access to Schoology, which is a learning management system. So what it looked like before we closed, paras provide support in the classroom. And so for them to go from just a brick and mortar, traditional in-person, to then get them on Schoology, train them on Schoology and Big Blue Button, and then give support to students, it was, it took a lot of folks behind the scenes to make it happen. So we really leverage a lot of the resources we have in our district. The list of people to thank to make this happen would go on. I mean, the instructional coaches at all the buildings have been chipping in. We have DCIU and the CCIU, Rachel Lewis, among others, really helping to train each week on how to support students online. And it's one thing to try to, have a student, focus in the classroom and to be organized and structured and turn assignments in on time. It's a whole different animal when you're trying to do it remotely from home. So some of the trainings have been on just how do you support a student when they become off task, where they're misbehaving and they're acting inappropriately on the screen. So again, this is K to 12, so it looks different, at a second grade classroom than up at the high school. So again, these 74 paraprofessionals, they're serving a variety of capacities, whether it's a one-on-one or an access. So again, we realized that relationships were critical during the school closure. So the plan was that every pair would then reunite with a student or teacher they were working with. So there's that familiar basis. And we also realized things change when you're online. So some of the para supports have changed and working with different students that need it. I mean, some students are doing really well online, others are struggling. So again, we're trying to evolve and adapt to meet the students where they're at. So again, it's been a really neat project to do. Like I said, we have 74 paras, leading the way. And, once I'm in an IEP meeting or talking to a teacher or parent and they know that a para is going to start helping with classroom instruction, organization, or just finding ways to help the students be successful, it's always met with, thank you, we needed this, we're struggling. Just trying to keep track of all the assignments they're due in Schoology, to submit them, to upload them, to make a video, it becomes overwhelming at times. So again, these paras have been a really nice addition, and they're really enjoying it too. I mean, Schoology is something they never had exposure to until we closed. So, during spring break, we really got the training and plan into place. Dr. McCook, I see he's on here too. His department's been wonderful because our para educators did not have a district device. So again, he worked with our current computers to deploy those out to the paraprofessionals during the school closure. His team distribute them at the different buildings. So again, it's really been a neat team effort to see come to fruition. And without talking too much, I know there's a packed agenda tonight. I do want to leave a few minutes for questions. So, at your leisure, again, take a look at the document. There's 9 pages in there. The last pages are just the Radner roundup. So I try to get each of the levels, elementary, middle, and high school, just give a little snippet of what's happening, how the para is being utilized in the classroom. So again, Mr. Bechtold, you asked me for just a quick executive summary. Hopefully I captured some of the key pieces of it. At this time, any questions from the board?
I just want to say before we go into questions, which we will do, the lead team, so Mr. Budabal was the project lead, and Brett Thomas at the high school, Doug Kent at the middle school, and Heather Gillen Esposito at the elementary school. I want to say that I really appreciated all the level of detail in here, that we, really saw who, first of all, who the paras are. I appreciated that, and the level of the training was very detailed, and that was really informative to see everything that you went through. And I want to highlight this particular initiative because I want the public to know, if anyone's watching out there, that the paras have remained on staff, as has all district personnel. And I want the misconception that, oh, well, what are people doing? There's no costs because students aren't in school. And nothing could be further from the truth. And so this highlights what we're doing. We're transferring basically the support that a para would give a student in class, in school, to allowing them to be that same support for a student virtually. And so that does take training. As Ryan said, even the technology piece wasn't in place for the paras, but it's really important that the point be made how much work is going into, getting this support. And this is all for the benefit of the students. And most of these students are identified as having this need. It's written probably in their IEP for many of them. And so this is support that our district has to provide. So I want people to know that it's more complicated than, oh, well, the students aren't there, what are the paras doing? This document really tells you what they're doing. All right, so committee members, does anyone have anything else they'd like to ask about or highlight about this? I think it's really comprehensive, but it may bring up questions for everybody. Mrs. McMenamin, I see you are unmuted.
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody, Mr. Beardball, and everybody that coordinated that. As somebody who works closely with paraprofessionals at the middle school level anyway, all of these people have jumped in and have been more than willing to help and meet with students and even, help out with the assignments, communicating with students, seeing kids, coordinating all those assignments, just like he said, and a lot more. So it's extremely appreciative coming from me as a special ed teacher in working with all of these paras at the middle school. They are all busy, they are all doing it, and they're actually very appreciative that they've been given the opportunity to continue to reach out with kids because they were missing that contact with the kids too. And they've been vital in this process as we've moved forward. So I just wanted to put a shout out to everybody that organized it and to the paras themselves because they really stepped up and rose to the occasion.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for saying that and really bringing that to light. Andrew?
Yeah, just very quickly, this is all a matter of opinion, but from what I understand, we're doing very well on this particular issue in general. I think, compared to what other districts might be doing, I think we're right there. And I think it's important to kind of point that out for the public that, relative to other districts in our area and the state, we're right there. We're very much on the front foot with this.
And I, along with the thank you, sorry, there's a train going by. I wanted to say, I apologize. I was one of those people at the beginning who said, I know the paras want to be involved. Why aren't we engaging them? Why aren't they, doing something? And even being involved in this, it hadn't occurred to me they need a device. Because I'm thinking, well, can't they just make phone calls? Don't they have a computer? But it doesn't necessarily mean they have Schoology. It doesn't necessarily mean they've used Schoology. So those things that I think a lot of us, especially as parents, kind of take for granted might already be in place weren't. And I appreciate that you were all amenable to figuring out how to do it and do it quickly so that to keep that staff engaged. Because I think Andrea's right. They're all people who want to be engaged and people get frustrated when they feel like they're being left out. So I'm glad that we were able to, continue those services to our students with an engaged population of staff. So thank you very much. Please pass that along to the team.
Will do. Thank you.
Ms. Goldman, any questions, comments?
Yeah, I'll echo what's been said here already, that I think it's tremendous, the vision to do this with the paraprofessionals and the plan that you've put together. If it's unique among districts, I'd like to know that. I think it's worth being featured if you're not too bashful about it. I think, honestly, no kidding, I'd really like to know. So feel free to answer. Is it unique? Is it something that's sort of trailblazing in the county or otherwise?
I think so. I think they're way ahead of.
Let me let the leader here, if that's okay, Mr. Buterball.
It was really a team effort, under Mr. Bechtold's guidance and Mr. Dukevich, they really, and Dr. Kent, Mr. Thomas, and Mrs. Galen Esposito, we just started to collaborate, brainstorm, we set a scope and goal. We didn't know what it was going to look like, and it just evolved. And again, I really can't talk to what the neighboring schools or state. I just think that, during this emergency situation, we looked internally to our resources, and I think that it was echoed throughout the evening here. The paras are really excited to reconnect with the students. Right? It was so great to see, Dave on this in the BBB session yesterday and to see how he's doing. And, I lit up when I saw him. And the paras are passionate about what they do. And it was nice to see both the student and the para, find value in this. Mr. Bechtold, I'll put you on the spot here. Are you aware of what the other, schools and throughout the Commonwealth or the county are doing?
I don't have an exact poll, but I can say that to Mrs. Goldman's question, I think that we are one of the trailblazers in this. It was a significant amount of work, and I do have to give a ton of credit to Byron and his team, to Ryan and the team that he oversaw, to our special ed department. Really, we had to identify, do they have a device? Do they have internet? They've never used Schoology before. We had to get them trained on Schoology. They never used BBB before. We had to get them trained on that. And being a paraeducator in a brick and mortar setting is very different than supporting students virtually. And so we had to get them training for how to do their job virtually, which was a challenge. So I do not know what other districts are doing this, but I cannot imagine that many are. I have not heard what they have.
Oh, and by the way, that was a little bit of a leading question because I had heard some complaints from people in other districts about not having access to their paras. And also, it makes me think, I'm not sure that cyber schools are doing what we're doing in terms of special education students. So put that in your head for a second, and we may need to revisit that because that's that's an incredible accomplishment that makes our public schools, even more valuable for anyone who might be considering, something else. But the other thing I wanted to ask is, I know initially, because there were Herculean efforts on the part of our special ed staff, but the absence of the paras when kids are home for kids who are really have struggled to engage in school was noticed. I think that there were some special education families that had some concerns. Have you happened to either boots on the ground, Mrs. McMenamin, or others heard directly from families the impact that this para training is having on their students?
I can speak for the families that I know, that the paras that I'm working with. I've heard from all of them, and they all are extremely appreciative. They spend a lot of time trying to reach out to the kids, getting the kids to come online, sitting and working with them through their assignments. So for some of them, the parents actually can take a little breather because they're doing a little bit of the setup like they would do if they were in a building, kind of working just through the computer, but working through things. But feedback that I have heard has been very positive, that they're back and involved.
One of the things I'll say, I've got to give a ton of credit to our special education teachers, because they work exceptionally hard. And if you look at the high school and the middle school, they're teaching a full teaching load, and they also have a caseload. And so they were burning the candle at both ends, working to support their students before we got the paras up. And so really this allowed us to bring them back to a more semblance of work-life balance, and have someone that could work directly with the students on a daily basis to really support those students. So, I thank the special ed teachers, K to 12, for all their efforts, and we're really glad that we've got the paraeducators working with our students.
And Amy, just to further answer your question, so working in an environment that had to go virtual, it took a long time to get teachers up and running. And so it was sort of triage. So then the next step was getting the paras up and running. So from experience, I know that we are ahead of other places in getting to that next tier of getting our paras up and running with our students. So I think, again, just what everyone said, kudos to you guys, the team, for getting that moving and implemented. Ryan, anything more on the para training that you want to highlight?
I will say that, the trainings have been just really incredible. And I mentioned this earlier, the first earlier part, back in late April and May, was just the Schoology and the big blue button. And, Schoology is just a really powerful resource and tool. And one of the features that some of the paraeducators are accessing and utilizing, it's called Advisor. So if they're assigned to a student, they can click on the student, they can see all the assignments for the day, for the week, the calendar, much like a parent would see. And so, students sometimes struggle with organization and time management. So, that training, just to go in and say, hey, I see you have, a book report due, or you have this math packet worksheet 2 coming up, or have you submitted this yet? And that's the challenge, is the organization and time management, chunking, some of those executive functioning pieces that our students, especially students with an IEP, may struggle with. So I know those have been really helpful. And the different trainings from the IU in particular, we had Amy McLency and Jackie Santalupo present last Wednesday, and they just gave different strategies about what do you do if the student is not on task, if they're bouncing around the screen a whole lot, just those little strategies that paras can refocus the student on. Because in the classroom, it's a little different. You can tap on your desk, you can walk next proximity to the student. But again, when you're online, it's a new challenge. So I think these have been really helpful too. Dr. Erbacher from the DCIU presented the week before, and she had some really great points too, just about risk assessment and look-fors. I mean, with mental health right now, can imagine what some of our youngsters are going through. And she was just giving like if students are talking with you and they share something, if they mention, if they feel they're sad, just, she's really an expert in that field. So just those little, signs that maybe early red flags for students. And then Rachel Lewis, she led off the training from CCIU, which we contract with. And again, she had a really great presentation of just different strategies. It's called adaptations and accommodations. And one of the things that you could accomplish in the traditional classroom, it's very difficult to replicate online. So she just gave a ton of strategies to paraeducators, to assist with modifying an assignment so the student can complete it even where they're at. So again, thank you for the questions. Thank you for the opportunity, to lead this project.
Lydia, may I ask just something Ryan said made me something pop into my head. First of all, it's not lost on me or any of us. You had to do all this training online. I mean, that's a whole nother thing too. I forget reflexively. I think, oh, well, you all met, you did training. No, you had to train online, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but that make it that much harder to do it that way. But secondly, something that's been occurring to me is that I get it that families feel that this is valuable, but this, for some reason, I'm wondering if, for the video that Jenny and George did, for example, that was really helpful to help explain sort of how special education was going to work virtually and what the supports are. I'm not sure if this para training was a part of that, but it might be nice to let the community know about this, particularly the parents whose students have paras, because it was a massive undertaking. It's a whole new extra form of service that our district is providing, and I wouldn't be shy to let the community know about it, especially because I think it's and something you mentioned about the parents. When you have a child who struggles with school, it's really hard when that struggle is full-time at home. So when you mentioned taking care of the students, I'm just wondering if there's anything you can do to help support the parents too, in addition to that, by letting them know how much you're investing in this. And as you think about resources to keep kids on task, if there's anything else to support the home that you can do, I can imagine there are a lot of parents who are really struggling. You're talking about mental health. The parents are struggling. I've seen it as I walk around my neighborhood. Kids who have special education needs are getting great services from the district, but it's really hard at home. So just something else to think about as this evolves, and especially if we're in this situation going into the fall. Share out what you're doing and think about it maybe more broadly in terms of the families, not just the students.
Yeah, you know what, Amy, those are great points. And I also want to just echo that having Dr. Erbacher present to the paras is a great safety net. So she's our expert really on all areas of suicide prevention and risk assessment. So just knowing that there's more eyes and ears out there that are trained to look for that makes me feel a little better, more comfortable. So yeah. All right. Thank you, Mr. Budabak. Great work.
Appreciate it. Thank you. And stay safe, everyone.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on to 4.4, Zoom as an option for live streaming. Mr. Bechtel?
Actually, Mr. Dukevich is going to kick us off here.
Okay.
Thank you and good evening, everybody. So Zoom as an option has essentially emerged throughout this process as we continue to look at our programming, look at the options we're providing for our teachers and for our students, and recognizing that that's kind of an ever-evolving component. In the beginning, when we were assessing our live opportunities, Zoom was a front runner with Big Blue Button. But at the time, if you recall, there was a lot of trepidation around the security issues, and everyone knows the stories. They made the news. And so we were much more cautious in the beginning with allowing Zoom as a live synchronous option for teachers. However, as things have unfolded and Zoom has corrected a lot of the security issues, we've heard the feedback from parents and from teachers requesting access to Zoom, as it does allow them some different features that Big Blue Button does not. And we had been using Zoom for other reasons. For example, for parents and meetings that were not part of the Schoology platform, we would meet with them through Zoom, or for IEP meetings and 504 meetings, we would meet through them with Zoom. Some of our outside service providers were facilitating synchronous sessions through Zoom. So as things evolved and we recognized that Zoom corrected a lot of the things that were that caused trepidation on our part, we recognized and wanted to trial it with our teachers. So recently we opened Zoom as a live option at the elementary level. And primarily the reason for this was the parents have a lot to do behind the scenes to make things happen for their kids. So organizing them, preparing them, doing logistics involved with technology to get them online needs a lot of adult support. And so the oversight from a parent with a live option is different from that of a secondary student. And so a lot of those Zoom security issues, I think almost all of them happened at a later age because kids had more autonomy and some of them more mischievous perhaps. But so some of the Zoom bombing situations were more secondary focused. So we have taken even more of a cautious approach there, and we're piloting with a committee some Zoom options at the secondary level. But that being said, Zoom, as we've implemented at the elementary level, has gone very well. In fact, all of the feedback I've heard so far has been very positive. And we've given that as an option to teachers so they can still continue to use Big Blue Button if it's worked really well for them. And they've invested a lot of time and professional development there. We don't want them to make a change for no reason. So we've really just given them another option. And throughout this process, we've really just tried to remove barriers. And for some folks, they felt Zoom was an easier platform. It was more recognizable and universal for parents. And so far, that's really the feedback we've received. And I would say over the next couple of weeks as secondary pilots that, perhaps that is an option we could look at going forward. And interestingly, I'd add New York City Department of Education started with Zoom and then revoked the option to use Zoom. And then after Zoom made all these adjustments, they've now opened Zoom again for their teachers to use. So we're in a kind of a similar fashion. We just took a more cautious approach in the beginning.
All right, committee members, Ms. Goldman, do you have any questions on that?
I'm good, thanks.
Okay, Dr. Babson?
Nope. Answered everything in our planning meeting. Thanks.
Yeah. Ms. Dunn? Okay, and I said this when I heard about it. I think this is a great move because it breaks down maybe one more barrier for elementary families in that I think Zoom is really easy to use and I think lots of parents know it. And so we should definitely be on a platform that the parents can assist the students in learning. And the last thing you want to do is introduce yet another platform, the Big Blue Button, when they're all using, Zoom with their families and, they have to download another system. So I fully support this. Just let's break down barriers. Let teachers use what they're comfortable with and what families and students are most proficient with.
Can I just say something? I think it's a tool we want to maybe consider, pandemic or not. I think it's a tool that has potential in a lot of ways going forward when we don't have the opportunity to get together or parents need to meet with teachers or whatever. So I think there are a lot of people who've never heard of Zoom before. And now I just got an email from Zoom coming across my screen. So I am a frequent Zoom user and I think a lot of people are too.
I think Mrs. Solomon likes the idea of Zoom curriculum meetings.
I don't mind. No, I spoke to someone today who we were on a Zoom training session. And I said, oh, same thing as Ms. Goldman. I hadn't heard of it until March. And this person said, no, they're a doctoral student and they do their supervision on Zoom and have been for the past year because it was really hard to get together with the person who's supervising them. So you're right. This opens a whole new world of options.
I would just like to say that Big Blue Button has personally been pretty solid so far, but and one of the features of it that has worked really well has been the breakout rooms where you can send people into specific breakout rooms and they do like independent work and then you can reconvene to discuss what you were talked about. That's been used in my language classes specifically. And so I'm not like a Zoom expert, but I don't think there's that function. So I think just stressing the importance of teachers using what they want is pretty important.
No, Zoom has that function as well. I don't know if they always did, but we were definitely in breakout sessions this morning in my training. So you can do it. I don't know when it came into function, and I don't know how it differs. Maybe it's not as easy as the big blue button to do, but they had it this morning.
Jesse, thanks for that. It's great to hear that.
Right. So no other comments on Zoom. Let's move on to the math placement criteria. This is 4.5.
It is, and Dr. Kearney's here. He's been working very closely with our math vertical team to go and look at our placement criteria. A lot of the data points that we have historically used due to the COVID-19 crisis had to be rethought because we didn't have those data points. So I give a lot of credit to Dr. Kearney and the math teachers as they went through and really tried to put a system together to make sure that we had the most solid places we could for students. So Dr. Kearney.
Thank you very much, everyone. As Mr. Bechtold said, well, under these circumstances, we can't gather all the data that we normally would gather to make those placement decisions. It's in a normal year, it's in the month of May when we're giving our evidence of mastery assessments to see those students who might be more appropriately placed, excuse me, in an accelerated math course, but we're not able to do that now. And we're also not going to be able to give our end of course assessments, which is used in some grade levels for math placement. So we did take a look and see what was it that we would have available this year to make those decisions about math placement. How have students who've been successful in various math courses done on those pieces of criteria in the past? And we came up with the document that I'm going to share with you today. So we started with administrators taking a look at what data was available to us and how students done in the past, and came up with what we thought was workable criteria under two scenarios. One would be if it turns out that we're able to give an evidence of mastery assessment before the beginning of the next school year, and if we are not able to give one before the beginning of next school year. At the elementary level, because of how course one is offered, talking with the principals there, they thought that if we're able to give an evidence of mastery test by end of August, very beginning of September, that would be okay for placing students into course one there. And then talking with the middle school administrators, they felt that because of course scheduling and the configuration of students, we really need to get an evidence mastery test in by mid-July at the latest if we were going to gather that data. So we thought about what criteria might we use to decide who would take an evidence mastery assessment if we're able to give it, knowing that we don't want to have more people than necessary come in to take the test. We want to make sure that we're following all the distancing guidelines if we were to administer assessments, but also knowing that we won't have the same amount of time to administer the assessments, score the assessments, process that data, and communicate to families about where the placement would lie. So we do want to limit the number of students who would take a test, an evidence of mastery test, in the event that we're able to give one. After we came up with what we thought looked like a good starting point for that criteria, we met with fourth grade teachers, fifth grade teachers, and then representatives from sixth, seventh, and eighth grade to review that criteria, get their input based on the students that they know they have in their classes right now, as well as their experience with students in their math courses from previous years, and made some revisions to the data that you see before you based on that, and the criteria that you see before you based on that. So just to go through kind of quickly, Mr. Bechtold, if you don't mind pulling up the document again, it might be useful for people who are watching at home to see it. On the first page there, typically, as I had said, this is the time of year when fourth grade students who were interested in the possibility of testing into course one, which is a high level sixth grade math course, they would be taking the evidence mastery of fifth grade. So they would have to demonstrate that they have command over the most important skills and concepts from our fifth grade math course. What we're saying is that if we're able to give that assessment, we would give it to those students who are in the 90th or above percentile with the winter math, 90% on their unit exams before closure, as well as 90% average on their midterm. But if we're not able to do that, we have to have a higher bar because we won't have that evidence of mastery data that is usually the most important piece of data that we look at. So we were saying 95, 95, and 95% on the MAP unit assessment average, as well as mid-year exams. We do allow some observable characteristics so teachers can weigh in to make sure that if there's somebody who's very, very close, or if there's another consideration that we need to factor in when we're making placement decisions, we do want to hear from them because we won't have the data that we would normally give. But we also had to know that making that jump from 4th grade into course 1 is a very high jump. It's one that, in a normal year, very few students do anyway. And in an extraordinary year like this, we want to make sure that we are being careful about the placement of those students into that course. If you don't mind going on to the next page. So if you see here, similarly with 5th grade students going into 6th grade seminar level, course 2-3, they would also take the evidence of mastery. We've set up the same criteria for students to either take that if we're able to give it over the summer, or place students in that course if we're not able to give it in the summer. For 5th grade students who are going into course 1 at the honors level, the criteria is not all that different from what it would be in a typical year. The one difference is that normally we use the end of course assessment as a piece of criteria. We're not going to have that this year. So we're using 90% on common assessments, which are the unit assessments up till the closure to make that decision. And those students who are in the 87 to 89% range on those common assessments could override into that course if their parents so choose. And similar for 6th grade students in course 1 going to a higher level, honors course 2-3. Students in this situation, they're not accelerating over a course, they're just changing the level of the course within the grade level that they would be taking. And then finally, Mr. Bechtel, down the last page. This page tries to highlight the changes in the math placement criteria for students who would be accelerating over a course, so they would actually skip a course if they were to make one of these moves, as well as change course level. And similar, for these students who are going from 6th grade level 1 course 1 to 7th grade seminar algebra 1, or students who are going from 6th honors course 1 to 7th algebra 1, the criteria to take the evidence of mastery assessment is not different. But if we're not able to give that assessment, then the criteria to qualify for that course would be higher, with 95th percentile on the map, 95th percentile on unit assessments, and observable characteristics by their current teacher. And finally, for students who are making the change from 7th grade course 2 to 8th grade honors algebra 1, what we'd be using is similar criteria as now to allow them to take the prerequisite skills test. But if we're not able to give that, we'd have criteria of 90 percentile on the map, 90% on the common assessments, and observable characteristics for students to make that change. So that's sort of an overview of what it is that we've come up with to make these decisions for this year based on the data that we're going to have. Both the administrative teams at the middle school and the elementary school, as well as the teachers who were involved in offering input in this, feel pretty confident that this will correctly place students, although certainly we would like to use the typical process and get as much data as possible, particularly for those students who might be accelerating into a course. Happy to take any questions that you may have.
Okay, Ms. Dunn, do you want to?
Yeah, just really quickly. So I know we had a presentation, it was not that many months ago, from Mr. Scansell and Ms. Kindred with these wonderful new plans they had for, really making sure that we were putting kids in the right math programs. And that's kind of out the window, it sounds like, for this year, because we don't have the test, we don't have the data that we wanted.
I would say,
have that situation, or were they able to use that to inform this? I mean, and we'll implement it again next year.
Right. So I would say that the work that we did for that presentation, I think it was in January, where we talked about revisions to the math placement criteria. Actually, that data was very useful for making these changes here. Clearly, it's not exactly the same as what we presented then, because we would like to use end of course assessments. We would like to use the evidence of mastery assessment. However, we were able to go back and look at the same sets of students over the past few years and how they had done in courses to see where they fell on this criteria, and made the best decisions that we could with that. Similarly, we talked at that meeting about changes that we were going to be making. We anticipate being making for the elementary placement criteria.
Right.
They weren't going to go into place for this upcoming school year, but for the following school year. Mm-hmm. We're not implementing them as written, because again, we don't have all of the same data. Okay. But the changes that we're planning for 2 years from now help to inform what we're looking at to place students for this year now. So that work actually really, it fed into and helped these decisions an awful lot. And although this is not the same as what we had presented then, because we're not able to do the same thing, the process and a lot of the information that we gathered from that is in addition to the decisions that we made at that time, really helped to inform what we're saying we're going to try and do this year.
Great, thank you. I'm glad to hear that was useful, because it was clear that they had put a lot of effort into that.
Dr. Babson, anything? You're muted. You're muted.
All my questions were answered in the planning meeting. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Goldman?
Yeah, just because most of the changes, if the EOM is not able to be administered, require students to have done better in previous metrics. And I'm just interested in the rationale for that. Is that a way of making it more selective, which you think the end of year mastery assessment would have done essentially the same way? And since you don't have that, this is a way to keep it as selective as it otherwise would have been. There's one course where actually it goes down, I think, if I'm reading this properly, relative to it was a 7th grade where the scores needed were a little bit lower, but for the other ones, you need to go from 90% to 95% on the same assessment.
Right, so that was the thinking behind that. The thinking is that the 95th percentile, we believe, would capture those students who would be most likely correctly placed in an accelerated course without having them test over the material that they would be missing, which is something that we're hesitant to do, but recognize that we may have to do. In the case where we could give the evidence of mastery assessment, the idea is that we want to give students the chance to place in, if they would so choose, within considerations of who might have the possibility of scoring at a level where they would qualify for accelerated course. But we don't think that the criteria to take the evidence of mastery assessment would accurately identify those students who could be accelerated without the evidence of mastery assessment. So that's why the bar is higher to get into an accelerate over a course without demonstrating that you have command over the material, the most important material from that course that you would be missing. That was the thinking behind that. The teachers in particular, we are a little hesitant to accelerate students without them demonstrating that mastery, but at the same time, we recognize that there are likely students who are ready for it, and we want to make sure that they have an opportunity. Obviously, it'll be something that's taken a look at the beginning of this year and throughout next year, beginning of next year and throughout the year, to see how they're doing in that class and if any adjustments need to be made, after we've done placements. But we want to be as accurate as possible going into the school year and identifying those students who might need and be ready for an accelerated math placement. You might have been referring to the very last row for 7th grade course 2 and then honors algebra 1, where the criteria to qualify is a little lower than it is for the other courses. This was in conversations with those teachers of those courses, and they felt that jump, although it is acceleration, is not as great a jump as the leap from one honors level course to another seminar level course in a different grade level. So they felt that, yes, they would definitely want to give that prerequisite skills test and are hesitant to place a student without taking it, but they felt that criteria would accurately select for students who could be successful in that course.
Thank you. Yeah, it must be hard having essentially lost the opportunity to instruct for March, April, and May and June, 3 months, to have any reasonable comparison for how prepared a student might be. So is there any flexibility different from previous years, given the circumstances, if that end of year mastery, if this new schema doesn't quite hit the mark and students are struggling in there?
Yeah, so we certainly recognize that the end of this school year and the beginning of next school year will be different from typical years. And as Mr. Bechtold mentioned at the beginning, some of the work that we are planning for teachers to do on June 8th is to look at what it is that a student's experience was in a course at the end of the year. Was there material that they might have typically been taught in a normal year that they missed this year or didn't get to quite as deep as they otherwise would have? And also, what is it that we do with students in the fall? What is the most important content? What is the most important skills? What are the most important understandings in the beginning of the year that we really want to emphasize? And then how do we help to determine what students are ready for? So what pre-assessments might we use to see what a student's ready for coming into the school year, so teachers can make informed instructional decisions about where to meet them? So we recognize that this year is different than other years, and we're going to have to plan around that and plan for that. As far as if it turns out that we're woefully off the mark and a student's placed into a course that they are not prepared for, certainly those adjustments are made. We just want to minimize the number of changes that have to happen at the at any point of the school year, including at the beginning of next school year. So, for example, in fourth grade, the course one course takes place at the same time as a fifth grade math course. So for a fourth grade student who may have accelerated in, we can make that adjustment. It's not ideal, but it could be done. At the middle school, our math courses are often, they are offered for the most part at different times of the day. There may be some juggling of schedules if need be, but adjustments are made based on individual students, and every year as needed. Next year, it's something we're going to be paying attention to. Again, we just want to minimize it as much as we can and make the best decisions we can going into the school year.
Great, thank you.
Jesse, do you have any wisdom to share, having gone through the middle school and the elementary school?
Regarding math placement, it has changed a lot since even I was there. So I don't even know how to do the middle school math anymore. I try to help my siblings and I struggle. So I'm not that much help in this department. So yeah, that's all.
You better hope Mr. McBride's not listening.
I'm very good at his math.
All right, thank you for sharing that. So math placement historically has been kind of a hot button. And so every time we change it, it seems, I think we were getting it, refined. So I'm way up here, looking down from the atmosphere on this. It just seems intuitively like it would be unlikely, having missed 4 months, 3.5 months of school, that anybody is going to want to accelerate, or even skip a class when they haven't been instructed in the class from this year completely. They've only done 2/3 of it.
Can I just, because you and Amy both kind of implied this, and my kids are in school right now.
Yeah.
They're not without instruction.
Right.
I mean, they are getting instruction. They're meeting, especially the math program. I'm not trying to bash any other program, but my kids' math teachers, they both rave about how well they've been setting up time to, offer instruction if you want to attend. They have math, office hours. My the middle school students' math teacher emails us regularly with updates, and they're really making sure that the kids stay on track. I'm not saying kids are getting ahead, but I wouldn't say that they're not getting instruction. I don't think we're leaving our math students with only 2/3 of a year worth of education. I know there are kids who are struggling with this, so I know, every family is different, but I don't think it's fair to say our teachers aren't offering instruction. Nobody's perfect. Not every class is the same, but I do think it's there. And I think that a lot of the kids are still learning.
Yeah, I think another way to say it could be, maybe Lydia, maybe what you're driving at is they're not on site, and maybe that could perhaps, be a factor more for certain kids or grade levels than others. That dynamic could be there.
I didn't mean to give that impression, Sarah, at all, because actually I've heard from families some pretty tremendous things about the way math instruction is being delivered. But
I know we're thinking instruction in the school versus, but yeah.
But I can imagine that, and maybe I'm wrong, but I can imagine that teachers are concerned about, is this working? Distance learning, especially in the absence of assessments that they typically give. They might be wondering, are we doing what we typically do? And so that's why, and I think that it was, these 3 months for everybody leave some question about what's being captured, what isn't. And so for something like this, a process where it's really significant when you go from one course to another, you know, you leapfrog over something. That's why I just think that it's probably especially hard and variable on everybody's end.
Yeah, especially if you've got an older sibling like Jesse who can't help you.
You know, Sarah, thank you so much for correcting that, because
And I knew neither of you meant to say it that way. I just wanted to make sure nobody, yeah.
Really, thank you for just pointing that out. What I meant more was, and I think Ms. Goldman described this too, is that I'm working more under what we've been reading, in particular out of the information from Maryland, where in elementary school in particular, it's the math instruction that they're kind of most worried about in terms of kids grasping, not being in school, you know, face to face with their teacher. So it's more the concern that, not that we're not doing absolutely everything we can, I believe we are, but more what is the outcome? Because we really can't assess, you know, we can't accurately assess what they have learned, and we can't do continuous progress monitoring really. So I guess that brings me to the question, well, what if we used to have a criteria in there that if the student didn't get a certain grade when they moved up or when they skipped a level, that then they had the option to go back down? Do we have that in place so that in case, you know, we give somebody an out if it doesn't work out?
Yeah, at the middle school, their students are expected to maintain a 70% in their math courses. And if at the mid-year, the students below that, there's a conversation with the parents that you'll probably had started before the mid-year about whether continuing that course makes the most sense or not. So that is something that's still in place. And again, decisions are made with individual students and families every year if it turns out that somebody is really woefully misplaced in a course, one way or another. Sometimes students are moved up a level if it turns out that they're, you know, that they're ready for that, and sometimes they are moved down. So these conversations do happen. I think what you might be referring to is at the middle school, the expectation that students maintain 70% in the course.
Yeah, I thought we used to pretty closely look at the kids that did make a jump just to make sure that they, you know, earlier than the mid-year. Like I thought it was quite early on we looked at if they were showing mastery with the change.
Well, certainly the teachers are monitoring students' performance from the, you know, from the beginning of the course on. So it is something that they're looking at. And as I mentioned, if there was a concern, the conversation would likely happen before mid-year.
And we used to also have a part for teacher recommendations, and so that went when we
got rid of that a couple of years ago for math.
That's long gone, that piece.
There's been a lot of different thoughts about the teacher recommendation and whether that should be part of it or not. At the high school, that's basically how all course placement takes place. In the middle school and the elementary school, not as much. You may see on here, if we're not able to give the evidence of mastery, there is a part for observable characteristics based on what the teachers are seeing in the class. And back to the presentation that we did in January, going forward, as part of the matrix that we were thinking about using to place students into math, there was also observable characteristics based on what the teachers saw as part of it. So it is something that enters into the conversation, although most of the placement decisions are driven by assessment data. You know, speaking of the criteria that we're using in March, a part of that matrix was the PSSA, which we're not giving this year. So this may not be the last conversation about math placement revisions, but they're getting smaller and smaller as we go forward.
Yeah, that brings up a whole nother question we didn't ask, which maybe some people are wondering. What is happening with SAT testing? Do any of you know what moving forward?
Currently, SATs and ACTs, test centers are closed because they're schools. And so that's on hold right now. So there's not SAT or ACT local testing. There are some, we have been speaking to some colleges and universities, and there are some colleges and universities that are looking to forego that next year for the students that are currently juniors that would be seniors. I don't know how widespread this will be, but in preliminary discussions, they are exploring their options as well for admissions for students that are currently juniors. So we're keeping an eye on this. Right now, there are, the ACTs and SAT are looking to plan for administering them in the fall again, and they're exploring sites for various testing windows, but currently there's not a ton of takers based on the current situation as far as hosting in-person testing.
The majority of colleges that I've looked at, like in applying, are test optional for the next year, so it's becoming increasingly less of like an issue.
So is that being communicated out? This may be the wrong format. That would probably be guidance, but Jesse, how are students getting that information? High school students?
It's mostly being communicated. It's not being communicated like widespread, but if you're interested in a college and you like research or go to a virtual information session, they make it pretty apparent whether or not they're accepting SAT or ACT scores. So I guess the only way that you would figure out definitively is if you like research into that college and show interest in that college.
And our counselors actually, with under Mrs. Kevgis' leadership, in looking at what we should do with our grades and how we should finish out the year, our counselors were reaching out to colleges to talk to them to get their advice and to run by scenarios from them with what do you think? How will this look? How do we make sure we put Radner students? And so those conversations will continue with our counseling department with what are the changes and what the universities and colleges are looking for and how they're changing under these circumstances.
I know I took us way off tangent there, but I wondered if other people had that same concern or just question what's happening with all that. So thank you for that. I didn't know a lot of that. All right. I think that brings us to new business, unless any board member wants to loop back to any topics we covered, because we did go quickly. Everybody's good? Okay, let's move on then to new business. Anybody have anything? Okay, seeing none. That brings us to public comment.
We do have a public comment, which I will read. All right. Dear members of the board, I would like to take the time to introduce my Animal Assisted Intervention Program for the 2020-2021 school year. For the past 2 years, I have researched the possibility of getting a full-time therapy dog for Radner High School. There's no question as to the impact of the competitive high school environment like Radner can have on the students' stress levels, or as to the consequences the stress can have on a student's mental health. According to a study by the American Psychological Association, for example, teens reported that their stress levels during the school year far exceeded what they believe to be healthy, leading to symptoms of depression, sadness, fatigue, and decreased school performance. However, we have an opportunity to do our part in mitigating this national mental health crisis right here in Radner schools. Mrs. Wendy Greenwald, an RHS biology teacher, owns a 1-year-old golden retriever Brody, who is close to receiving his certification as a therapy dog. Many high schools and college campuses employ animal-assisted intervention programs to lower student stress levels, and it's understandable why. The UCLA Department of Health concluded that humans interacting with animals have found that petting the animal promotes the release of serotonin, prolactin, and oxytocin, all hormones that play a part in elevating moods. The release of these hormones contributes to lowering anxiety and helping people relax. The framework of our plan is as follows. Brody will be present at RHS full-time from 8 to 3 the majority of the school week. Brody will either stay in guidance in the library or in Mrs. Greenwald's office, maximizing contact with students. During her lunch, Mrs. Greenwald will take Brody out to walk and use the bathroom. Additionally, being mindful of allergies, we will distribute permission slips to ensure that students are aware of Brody's role We will limit Brody to a finite number of locations throughout the school to contain shedding. The strategy was effective at Centennial School District, which has already implemented their own full-time animal-assisted intervention program. Student enthusiasm for this program is extremely strong. The volunteer organization Pause for People has sent service dogs to Radner High School throughout the past 2 years, each time garnering participation from hundreds of students. Treated as trial runs, there were no issues reported during these visits. Additionally, in a 2018 student government poll, we found that over half of the respondents supported getting a full-time therapy dog. When we extrapolate this data, that amounts to over 600 students who feel that they would benefit from animal-assisted intervention. We are living through a time period that is especially stressful for both students and teachers. The increased uncertainty about and potentially different format of school next year makes it even more important to have measures in place to help students cope with the numerous stressors they experience on a daily basis. I have met with Radner High School Principal Mrs. Kevgis multiple times throughout the past year to discuss this project, and she passionately approves of the idea. I will reach out to Mr. Bechtold in the next couple of days to confirm the logistics and pursue next steps in the implementation of this plan. Ideally, we would have the dog available for the beginning of the 2020-2021 school year. We have dedicated the past year to researching and planning for this program and are confident that this is one significant step the district can make in improving the mental health of RTSD students. Thank you for your time and consideration. Sincerely, Andrew Rosen, Radner High School Executive Vice President, Class of 2021.
I just absolutely love the fact that Andrew commented about, I'll reach out to Mr. Bechtold. So perfect. Mr. Bechtold, if you could follow up on that, that would be great. And, we can report back.
Okay, so you didn't say who it was in the beginning, Mr. Bechtold. I thought that it was Ms. Grunewald, but it was not. It was actually a student, Andrew Rosen, who sent the comments. The comments came from a student.
So the comments, it says sincerely Andrew Rosen. It also has listed, so I received this forwarded from board questions from Ms. Calderoni. So I don't have the actual whose email sent it. It's signed Andrew Rosen. It's also signed Dr. Ricka Kleiman, who's a school psychologist, and Mrs. Wendy Greenawalt, who's a Radner High School faculty member. But I don't know if it just came from Andrews. He is the first one listed, so.
All right, thank you. So definitely something to follow up on, right? Because I do know that research-based, what they're saying is true. So, all right. Any other public comment? All right. I think that concludes our meeting. We will have, well, to follow in June, possibly 2 curriculum committee meetings in June. We've got lots of work to complete for the end of the year. So thank you everyone for your work, and more to come. We are adjourned.
Thank you.